Good evening, and welcome to the Dead Earth podcast. The Earth died long ago, and at first only a few of us realized. This is the future that awaits us all. This week's story is Snowing.
The inhabitants of Ashbury Lake have little in the way of entertainment, particularly this time of year. There is the usual mix of feeding, copulating, hunting, the more dangerous pleasure of outsmarting the bobbers and lures. But it all blends together. Even the richest flavors reduce down to a kind of noxious gruel eventually. That's what Ashbury Lake was for the pikes and the snapping turtles, and the mayflies and the pollywogs. A familiar stasis. There were high points, the first nipping signs of winter, the utter numbing that came to those entombed in a layer of frost, the relief of the sun's balm. But each year progressed in this familiar way, and we all accepted that as the boundaries of our existence. That was before inspiration struck. Before Thomas Lombardi's bloated mass was foisted upon our lake. It happened just as the cold began to show. We've seen such intrusions before. The settlers closest to the lake and those in the surrounding Ashbury wood sprawl from time to time meander their way down to our home. The old tossing in their broken machines and dismembered scrap. The young skimming across the precipice in their spinning, drifting armadas, casting bread and crisps and other various sop overboard in an attempt to appease and pacify our doddering surfacers. Eventually, they always leave, as though the lake is simply a diversion, a moment to be had and then lost as quick. But Thomas's arrival was different. His intrusion was just the beginning of our relationship with him. That day, there was a distant, rumbling roar, that familiar clarion of the settlers. The violent growl grew near and then cut short with a squeak and a quick succession of percussive beats. How we wished to rise from our internment. The striped perch and the shimmering gold eye and all the rest. To view what lie beyond in that grim blue and gray and black expanse. But we would not have dared. Not then. A new, lugubrious sound, warped as it was through our viscous domain, broke the momentary quiet. It was a man of 40 or 50, and he was begging. To whom was unclear. But the blubbering grew louder, more desperate. And then there was weeping, a mechanical click, a double set of footfalls. Thomas Lombardi screamed himself hoarse, sending his voice out into the dark and sealing his fate. And then our Thomas's herald shouted words that must have been for us, to announce his arrival, his offering. Thomas Lombardi, once a king, but never more. And then came the shriek of thunder with no lightning. And Thomas Lombardi arrived. As the roar returned to life and then faded away among the wind-whipped branches of Ashbury, and as we gazed up into the flat, drooping countenance of Thomas Lombardi, we did something we had never done before. We wondered why a particular occurrence might have happened. Never before had a body, bereft of its faculties and its noises, its incessant peregrinations, come to live among ourselves. But he did, and with him, he brought gifts. At first, only the most adventurous of us would approach. The flies and the worms poked and prodded our silent, buoyant observer, nipping cautiously at his bulged eyes and his swelling tongue. Gradually, nesting occurred, and the small ones flourished anew. Nits sprouted out from his nostrils, his ear canal. His lips were split many times over, producing smaller and smaller mouths from which life's song emerged triumphantly. In short order, it was understood why Thomas Lombardi had once been named a king. But his deliverer had been wrong on their second point. Thomas was still a king, though he now lorded over another domain entirely. And our life-granting liege was not done in his performance. Vestments of this other world were shed over time, so we might better behold his most perfect, waxen form beneath. We looked on in awe at this strange being as it orbited in our presence. Not a word was uttered as we marveled at the forests of dark fur festooning his torso, his nape, his pate, his sex. It swam along with us, dancing in time to the rhythm of our kind, in a show of asceticism, perhaps to teach us of the importance of shedding his former self in this new position of aquatic majesty. His eyeballs burst and scattered not long after, their fluids and their crumbs spinning out into our realm to join us and better understand our lowly postures. As if this performance was not already deserving of adulation, King Lombardi next performed a trick I was not aware possible. He brought with him the colors of his previous life, to show us what else existed out there, beyond our hovel. He first turned paler still than he already was, developing a glorious sheen that thickened and perspired from him in generous waves of which we all partook. The blueness began along his throat, accentuating a bulging Adam's apple grown 3 times its former size. The azure strip expanded outward, up to his nose, his sockets, down across the caps of his knees and his ballooning heels. His haunches were already speckled orange and red and pink, and once navy joined the palette, our king's hindquarters resembled that dim beauty of looming twilight and the setting sun. From the other direction flowed gangrene, beginning beneath his copper nails. This beautiful patina enveloped our monarch's limbs as they continued their distension, causing him to strike numerous heroic poses. Arms aloft, one green, one black, and a display of sheer stature. Dark hand upon purple thigh, imposing regality, legs and arms crossed as he gazed inward, becoming solitude itself. And still, he had one final act for us, a self-imposed coup de grace. He left the surface now, hovering just below, descending into our world to rest among us for all time. And as he did, months passed, and his flabby, now hulking form began to slough off of the bone. Slabs of glistening green, brown, crimson, gold left their wholesome form behind, each given a life all their own. And beneath this exterior was a beautiful red and white midden heap which flaked down onto us just as our world above froze over. The white globules of that outside realm, forever above and just out of reach, those shimmering specks that piled and danced along the wind, were now here among us, thanks to our king. all of Ashbury Lake reveled in Thomas's snow. Years passed, and nothing was ever quite the same. Tales were told. Factions formed, overthrew, dissolved in the blink of an eye, disputing over whether our Lord would return, whether we should expect another, or whether that incredible event had truly happened at all. The death cult of Thomas Lombardi fueled all our decisions, lingered in our dreams, and created within each of us an insatiable hunger. I myself was of no doubt that our Lord had come. Whether he would grace us with his presence again was not of my concern, because I remembered full well what happened. Thomas Lombardi was still among us, buried in the depths. His particles lingered at the lake's far corners. We all still held some smallest piece of him within us. I say this with surety. One can only hunger for so long. So I gathered those among us most able, and we emerged from our home for the first time. Then the second, the third. We learned to look like you. We learned to dress like you, how to act like you. We can talk like you now, use your words to convince you, anger you, entice you. And always, among your kind, one or two will follow us to our home, so we may marvel again at you, as you do your best to perform for us in remembrance of him.
The Dead Earth podcast is created by Emily Lyles, Taylor Normington, John Reeder, and Dan Wallace. All stories are crafted by Taylor Normington. Snowing was performed by John Reeder. Our logo artwork is designed by Chloe Burns. You can find more of her work on Instagram at Tiny Moon Studios. Episodic artwork by Ari Boone. Our website is deadearthpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.